Hello everybody and good morning. Welcome to this Deloitte Grab and Go around global business services in the financial institutions. And I hope you're all doing well and are staying healthy out there in these special times. During the session, if you feel free to write questions into us, and we'll try to cover that in the end of the session. So just feel free to do that. There will be a little Q&A in the end of the session. Let me maybe just front load one key takeaway before we dive into all the details around GBS in financial institutions. And you know, if you executives or you are asking for cost efficiency, scalability, and agile ways of building on new capabilities, you do need to leverage GBS type structures in the organization. And if we look across the larger financial institution, almost all of them or close to has adopted GBS into their organization for these reasons at various maturity levels, and definitely there is a big potential there to drive maturity up, but it's really a concept that has been widely spread and is creating a lot of different benefits out there. But let's dive a little into the agenda of today. You know, three key things that we would like to address is basically, you know, how do you actually move beyond low-cost transactional services in a GBS structure? How do you evolve your operating model? And we also want to address some very concrete cases in the financial sector as we go through this element. And we are going to do that through basically three sections. I will start just with a brief introduction where I will define GBS as a concept. I will talk a little bit about the evolution of GBS, and then a little bit about how the NextGen GBS is actually defined. And then Srishti, my colleague, will take over and do some deep dives into different cases and different FSI, financial institution trends. And then in the end, I will wrap up around 10 practices that really defines a winning GBS structure. But let's maybe just introduce the speakers of today. I will start a little impolitely with myself, and then I will pass on the words to Srishti. My name is Thor Jensen. I joined Deloitte in 2003 and has basically spent the last 17 years designing, implementing, and optimizing global business services across most of the C25 companies in Denmark. And of course, it's a very concept that has developed a lot, and we will talk into that. And it's also, if you go into the larger financial institution as Deutsche Bank, Barclays, and others, you know, you could almost see a third or 2/3 of employees actually be in this type of concept. So it's getting as a very broad concept used across the industry. Srishti, a few words from you on what you bring to the table today.
Yeah. Thank you, Thor, and morning everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Srishti Krishna, and I am part of the UK GBS consulting team. I've been designing and implementing shared service BPO and GBS programs for over 18 years now. Have led this across financial service as well as private sector. Within UK GBS team, I lead the transition offering, which is nothing but designing solutions and implementing them in this space. And I also head the FSI GBS space in the UK. So that's where I come from. Worked with quite a few global banks from different regions in the world. So I'll bring my perspective into the mix shortly.
Okay, thanks, Srishti. Then a little to my introduction here before I'll pass the word back to Srishti. If you look at global business service as a concept, it has many names out there and also many forms and shapes. So if you go years back, it was basically shared services, maybe some arbitrage around it. But if you look at the concept, you could say it's very often multifunctional. So multiple functional services are provided to the business from a GBS. It's very often multi-regional. So you do provide these services depending on the reach of your company to all sorts of aspects in your business, multi-regional, multi-business unit. It's also very often multi-sourced. Some might be a captive, fully owned by you. some elements of the services might be outsourced. So that's another multi, you could say. So it's a concept where you need to think it quite broadly around how actually to provide services to the business, so you get away from building services and building capabilities very spread across the business, because it doesn't become sustainable and it doesn't become cutting edge by doing it that way. So that was just a little bit. If you then move in to how this concept has been evolving, then there's no doubt that it's been really around for 10, 15 plus years right now. It started very much as single functional shared service centers with a very high focus on transactional and low cost focus. And then it has moved into being more multifunctional and also getting in higher value add process areas, and Srishti will also get into that in some of her cases. And in the end here, when we truly talk global business services, it is becoming more of a end-to-end. And you could say, basically, to make it simple, the level of capabilities that you can deliver from a GBS is there's no limitations out there. So the things that you can mobilize from near shore, offshore, is basically just up to the strategy around what the GBS should play of a role in your business and how that should support execution of your strategy. So it's really expanding in the sense of the service scope and the capability scope that the GBS as an entity in your operating model can provide to regions and the business units. Let me just touch a little bit about what we see around next generation global business services. And on this slide, you basically see a little on the one side, some of the characteristics, and a little bit on the other side on the operating model. And I'm going to talk about that later on. So let me just focus a little on the left-hand side. Three of the elements that is a really discussion topic at the moment when we both design and optimize GBS is basically experience, speed, and insight. When we talk experience, it's really a lot about how the GBS interacts with the internal customer or ultimately also external customer. So that whole interface of the GBS towards your customers is really high. And expectations, when you're living your private life and you're going into Amazon and you know how you receive services and run through processes and one-click purchases in e-commerce, that kind of philosophy is very much translated into how GBS delivers services to the business. The other component is of course speed. GBS is very often measured on the speed and agility that you can bring about services and bolt on new services. So the whole engine room of your GBS needs to be optimized. Lastly, insight is becoming more and more a critical area. If you look at a GBS, it's pretty much the only place in a company where you have a very multifunctional perspective on data and insight. So when you have a GBS organization, you have supply chain information, you have finance information, you have sales information, you have HR information around customers, employees, or other elements in your business. That has up until now not really been utilized. So actually drive analytics and insights around that whole insight that you're sitting on in GBS becomes a vital part of the journey to keep adding value to the business as a GBS organization. So it's just to scratch a little in the surface around what is really driving kind of next generation value in GBS structures. And here, Srishti, let me pass over the word to you to really deep dive us a little in what has actually happened in the FSI sector and getting a little concrete on some of the value drivers in the financial institutions.
Yeah. Thanks, Tor. And I'll be talking for continuous for about 30 minutes or so. So if you need to go and grab a cup of coffee, just do so very quickly. We'll be covering a little bit into history of where the FSI model started in the last 2 decades, what the journey looks like. Post that, we'll take a quick look at what our recent surveys and research show us. After that, we'll go a little bit into what are the new realities for FSI market and what does that really mean for GBS. After that, we will shift our focus more towards the opportunity landscape. We'll take some examples of how technology disruption is changing the lens for these opportunities. And then we'll go a little bit deeper into a subsector, looking at insurance as a subsector and banking, retail banking as a subsector, where we look at the key trends and what clients are doing in this space. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to go very quickly through this just to set context, because Tor has done a great job already on this. FSI is fairly mature, given the journey's been there for about 20 years now. If I set some context on GBS is not a word that FSIs generally use. In short, this is something, this is more around the coup function or strategic office or sourcing function. So when we talk GBS, these are the three big functions we are talking about. The journey started way back in late 1990s, early 2000, and the drivers for that were mainly around cost and ability to scale and serve a particular market. Proof of concept was with IT standalone models, and from a banking perspective, most of the American banks started the journey, and GE led that. Setting up captive shared service center. On the other hand, if I look at insurers, they had a more BPO-led journey, with Aviva starting their journey with build, operate, transfer, where they asked a niche provider to build their center and transfer it to them. So two different journeys. Drivers remain the same, but two different trajectories that the market took from an insurance and banking sector perspective. If I look at the early challenge, and this is valid still for the first generation outsourcing or captive models. So cultural challenge, typical East-West, breakdown in the process as you split processes in different location and different teams. There's natural lower productivity associated with that. Poor infrastructure early on was a big challenge. Regulators were controlling workforce and data quite carefully, and therefore there were doors after doors and authentication processes that led to poor connectivity and issues in quality of services that. Then recession hit in between, where most of the journeys were paused or slowed down. We saw some exceptional moves in between, where UBS and Cognizant bought the UBS captive center. Similarly, Wipro took Citibank as their captive center, and that started the journey on the hybrid model, where BPOs and captive centers started to sit side by side. The key drivers now, there were more around talent and access to talent, and growing more in the functional space. So that's about the time we saw a lot of surge in FP&A outsourcing, outsourcing and captive uptake, a lot of back office such as claim processing and policy admins. In the insurance same, we saw that growing quite rapidly. So a lot of the other thing that we did notice quite a bit in that journey was the European banks started their journey around that 2010 mark. There was a lot of flooding in sort of captive centers in nearshore location as well as offshore locations, where a war for talent started. And that led to high attrition as one of the challenges. Now, over the last 5 years, technology just has disrupted pretty much all the models. And as as we saw in early stages, the banks and insurers are the first adopters of all of these digital technologies and other good things that are coming up in the market. So it almost feels like restarting the journey, but they're relatively integrated through co-functions, strategic offices, and sourcing function. The next journey is mainly around how the digital intervention is going to define the operating model. The interesting facts that we saw in during COVID was just the weaknesses in the process from an end-to-end perspective, ownership perspective. And that's another lens that's going to get applied in when the operating models start to take a different shape in them. Just to summarize, FSIs over the 2 decades have grown functionally and geographically, have changed focus and started to deliver value to the business. And it's about how to pivot the journey and redefine the journey in next 2 to 5 years. So now let's take a quick look at some of our facts and figures on research. And we've just done this pre-COVID, so I'll layer this with the COVID experience that we are seeing in the market. So if you tilt the focus on the traditional levers are going to be there. What we noticed was more of skill and change in skills going to drive the way GBSs are going to be organized. So if I look at an example from insurance, the underwriters now have the luxury of having real-time data in front of them to make the right decisions. But how that will be organized, whether in the back end, whether those data fields get uploaded in a manual format or an automated format, is going to drive the GBS model in the back end. Now, if you look at another example from a banking sector, you've got bot advisors, robo-advisors, and whether these bots are going to work for human or human will be a peer-to-peer relationship with these bots. So a lot of different skills, and that's going to drive the back-end redesign and how GBSs are going to operate. The second factor is around, we saw internal controls. What COVID did now, we've seen more and more, because of the digital technology, internal controls are being looked at quite carefully anyways, but COVID has enhanced the need to look at internal controls in a slightly different way. So that's another way the regulators are going to scrutinize the way GBSs behave in future, and what that means for GBS is going to be different. And then platform for change with the new technologies, the expectation to have a bigger and better business case and a stronger journey is almost a given in this case. So the 3 new levers, the old levers continue as they stand. So that's overall. If I'm, yeah.
Maybe just adding to that, I think two perspectives. I think we very often say offshoring and have a very global mindset when we talk into the GBS as a concept. But I just want to stress that if you are more of a local player or a Nordic player, the GBS as a concept in your operating model can still be leveraged. You might not get the salary arbitrage advantages and the access to capabilities that you have near shore or offshore, but you can still have a very strong entity in your organization. So that is just one perspective. Then one more thing to add to Srishti is around benefit. We also see that your ability to drive change, your ability to implement new systems and new procedures and new capabilities is also strengthened. So that is just an extra thing around flexibility, agility, next to the more harder benefits just explained by Srishti, that is also added to the case around GBS. The word back to you, Srishti.
Thank you. No worries. So if I look at another survey that we had in the outsourcing space, a lot of non-core processes are going to be on the rise as traditional outsourcing dies. The new uptake on outsourcing in these back office processes, we see that from captive, they are likely to move more towards outsourcing. It's just a trend. We don't know for sure after COVID how that is going to play out, but this is just this summary of I'm recapping. Now, if I look at the last bit, which is around how one global organization serves various regions. We call it in a simple term hub and spoke model. So your global offices are backed by a nearshore and onshore spoke. This is again now proven and tested model, and that will be this will continue on. But the additional efficiency, harmonization, and simplification of the processes will start to come through from these models from a geography perspective. Some of the barriers, if I look at Nordics as a market itself, some of the barriers for entry or having a global shared service center or captive center was mainly around ability to serve in a particular language or having face-to-face proximity. With chatbots and AIs and other natural language, that's almost shrinking, and the ability to have these global hubs and spoke models for across Europe and other Asia-Pac countries are becoming coming more to the surface. So that's on some facts and figures. Let's take a quick look at the new realities for FSI. And some of you will be familiar with these examples. But I'll just try to weave the GBS context in this. There's no better time for transformation. I think in the market, every bank I know is going through a transformation journey. It started with digital banking, with other technology drivers, but it's no longer a theory exercise. It's practical. It's most banks and insurers are living and breathing through that. So it's almost given here. Then if I look at staying competitive, in one of the surveys, most leaders acknowledge that organic growth will not be enough, and therefore the next M&A opportunity or equity partnership or alliance is going to be the key to success when it comes to growth. Therefore, we are seeing a lot of interesting alliances in the market. So if I look at in UK insurance, the top 2 or 3 insurers, they've built something called an innovation community where they pull in talents and they ideate to come back with a win-win scenario. That means not just knowledge sharing across within the sector, with your competitors, but also coming with an innovative model to solve a problem that exists within the industry. Another challenge that most FSI organizations are facing are the challenger banks and the challenger startups in the insurance sector. If I look at Revolut, Monzo, Sterling, they entered about 3 or 4 years in the market, or maybe sort of slightly longer to be fair, and they set themselves relatively quickly in the market. Same for startup insurance; they entered quickly, established themselves fairly quickly. So we are seeing alternative delivery model on the rise, and how fintech, insurtech strategies are clubbed with your innovation will drive the growth strategy for the organization. So then let's move on quickly to agility and growth. By agility, we say it's more about rebalancing between services and products, and how fast you can leverage digital challenges out in the digital channels out in the market. So traditionally, banks were built to serve in a building, to serve face to face. And as that shift starts to take place into serving the younger generation with digital technology, you'd almost need to rebalance that requirement. What that does is how you organize the back and middle office will dictate how quickly you would use those channels to get to the customer. That's on the agility using the digital tools and technologies. If we look at other factors like operational efficiencies and the next level customer experience, last 10-15 years, a lot of continuous improvement, process standardization, and the good things have happened, but they were over and above your normal process. It's no longer going to be the case. Now it's going to be these are just normal levers that will be part and parcel of your daily bank activities. So there's a shift in mindset and a shift in how you use these levers on your on a day-to-day basis. If I take an example, yeah.
Let me maybe just add a thing here. When I talk to executives out there, there's also a common question around operating model, and that is, how do I drive out complexity and simplify my business? And the thing is here with the GBS structure, when you take away from the business unit or the regions that they pretty much do everything, you do make them focus on what their primary task and objective is, rather than trying to manage smaller individual full-scale companies. So a part of this, you drive out dramatically complexity by actually centralizing and managing some of these elements that could be within a GBS. And the next element is then, of course, once you have that organizationally under control, it might be multi-location, but you have it organizational under control, you can also start to simplify and standardize that in a lot more efficient way. So when you look at your complexity out there, there's a reason for complexity, and that is the legacy and the history of things having been spread a lot and governance has not been clear. And if you are in the market and driving sales and growth, you are very seldom giving a bonus by being a king of back office. And actually pulling that into a GBS and other capabilities and making somebody fully responsible for that is really driving out efficiencies at a different level and a different timeline than when it's out decentral. So the whole simplicity and complexity in your business, this is also a lever to actually work with that in a quite a structured way. The word to you, Srishti, again.
Thank you. That just is a great segue into the what are we seeing in the GBS models, and the first is around the shift towards center office. By center office, we do not talk about this is a office located somewhere. It's a virtual network of teams that's driven through the need for talent, the need for growth, and the need to serve the enterprise. In a nutshell, it's a more evolved core functions plus sourcing function plus strategic program office. So it's a combination of those three things in there. It's underpinned by technology and demand, customer demand, and if I look at the key features of this center office, it's got 4 features: capability as a service. So if you look at how one would drive a program, using different types of talents across the globe. So it's possible that that you could have some teams building codes behind the scenes, some teams designing UX, or working together with fintech countries. So capabilities is going to be served across enterprise, but as a service. The second lever, the second feature of this center office is function as a service. Traditionally, functions have worked in silos and looked at their narrow processes. Now it's going to be reorganized to get the best out of those processes. So it's almost moving to the next level in the end-to-end process landscape. The third element of this center office is mature sourcing models. So as traditional contracts almost become redundant, and we are seeing few through COVID. How are you going to source an on-demand? Can you build 550 bots for me, or deploy a piece of technology using a niche vendor, versus how you're going to serve my traditional services? So mature shared sourcing models will be managed and governed by this office. And then the last is a customer experience. As we all know that customers are not going to be static, their demands are going to change, and as the demands change, there's a need to drive innovation. And this customer experience teams will sit and look at innovations, and what this could mean is you have teams governing or controlling the way personas and journeys are built in this office. So in a nutshell, it's similar to GBS. Is the next level of GBS is what we are talking about when we talk about center office. Now, if I take the next big trend that's out in the market, and it's leading from staying competitive, innovation, sourcing models enable speed and market growth and focus on product and service. So if I take a very simple example of cost of delivery innovative products, the challenger banks and startups have come in with almost no legacy, and they're able to deploy these markets very quickly in the market to get the best value out of their products. Traditionally, banks, let's take an example of a bank, back office, middle office, front office. That's the way banks were organized. Now it's almost given, and most big UK banks are on this journey where the back office is enabled by RPA, the back and in front is enabled by AI, and GBS is orchestrating all of this. So it's no longer theory, it's a proven concept, it's scalable concept that exists today. If I take another example of Standard Chartered Bank here, they have an alliance with Instabase, and what this is, it uses natural language processing along with OCR, along with machine learning. And how you strike that alliances and stay relevant is the key as to how you will use your mature GBS model in a particular way. The third example is more around how to grow when you are, kind of struggling with legacy issues and don't have the know-how to do that. So another example is that of a Hiscox and WNS, where they Hiscox wanted to enhance their capability in claims management and motor customers, and they didn't have the experience to do that. They went to a niche BPO provider, and they got access to technology as well as knowledge to scale that claims processing for them. So those are three different types of examples where innovative models are going to add to growth and speed to market. If I look at the third big game changer in the GBS world is ITO and BPO. As ITO goes into cloud and BPO goes into automation, there is going to be a natural shrinkage. And what we are starting to see in the market is your cloud providers are ready to provide BPO services and ITO service. Your BPO providers are ready to provide RPA and automatic services. So interesting instances there where one of our insurance clients very quickly went out and launched themselves in the market. This was a startup insurance by leveraging a service in a box service model using ITO BPO box services that were provided through a strategic partnership through one of the vendors. So again, shifts in traditional models and how you extract the value out of those. And GBS takes a bigger and better role. Most senior positions now in the GBS models have a say on the executive table. They're able to make decisions because of the incumbent knowledge and the amount of data they have carried historically. And we're seeing that with most UK banks. The decisions are taken in using a lot of knowledge that exists in these GBS organizations. So that's the summary of what we've seen from art of possible GBS and how the new realities are changing the way you would GBSs will get redesigned, innovate, and reorganize.
Maybe
so
Srishti,
now,
let me add here just one element here, hitting a little on innovation. And more and more we see that you are a part of an ecosystem. So back in the days, you built all capabilities yourself and try to manage that in the best possible way for customer service and profitability. More and more, the development in digital and other technologies and capabilities is going so fast, so building all that internally is not possible. The GBS is a structure that can also manage how you are part of an ecosystem, involve external parties on specific solutions, specific capabilities, and engage efficiently with that. If you do not have that, we see the ability for an enterprise to do that efficiently and leverage what is coming out of that is quite difficult. But I propose now, Srishti, that we jump to slide 12 and start to work a little with our 2 deep dives, and then we can get a little 2 case stories going here.
Yeah. I'll touch upon you've skipped it. Okay. Let's go a little bit deeper into insurance as example. If I look at very quickly in what is happening in the insurance market, aging, you've got an aging buyer, young buyer, Amazon-like shopping in from a products and services perspective. Insurance techs products like SQL, Duck Creek, DXCs, they come with microservices. So they come and sit straight on top of your pricing models, or you can have the data at a particular price to build your pricing model. So that's changing the landscape of how a traditional underwriter would do things, building models from scratch. The legacy marketplace is changing. So what used to be very much in-person marketplace, at least the Lloyd's London market is changing the physical infrastructure to more of how to access more customer and insurers directly. So that's going to change the landscape itself in a lot of ways. Fundamentally, the niche outsourced providers have been in the market. They've gone through a couple of rounds of negotiation, wafer thin margins, but what has happened is through legacy system, they've stayed with these outsourcing arrangements. And that's another challenge that we are seeing in the insurance market, where the technical debt and how you're tied to a BPO provider or a shared service model is quite clear in there. So if I look at very quickly into, so what are the clients doing? They're in summary, and I think we've covered quite a bit in the realities and other slides. There is digital transformation from front to back, right? And the next wave is more about aggressive looking at GBS approaches more aggressively. To see more cost saving. We are seeing that from Aviva, they're looking at margins and what the sort of cost to operate ratio is. Same as Direct Line Group, where it's not about just job cuts, it's digital transformation that is starting to drive the way you would engage with the talent. On the other hand, RSA Codan is more restructuring, through restructuring how it will extract value. So those are some very simple examples that we've got. The other elements are more around machine and talent integration. So how underwriters are using the dashboards and automation will drive how machine and talent will coexist. On the left-hand side, I haven't covered that. It's quite a busy slide. What is showing on the left is the potential opportunity that exists in insurance sector at a top level. And insurance, but particularly is seen as defined as core and non-core. And core is the underwriting activities, and anything below underwriting is deemed as non-core. And there is a lot of potential. At the same time, it's got appetite for digital rings on the green. It's evolving opportunities clubbed with how you can club that with digital technologies. On the blue, it's more traditional, and how you're going to automate those technologies. So that's the summary of the slides. And I know, Tor, we are just running out of time, right? So I'll take a quick example on the banking side. And I think fundamentally a lot of the insurance characteristics remain the same. For the bank, the big question is, because the workforce that's in GBS is really like in tens and thousands, like it's a very huge workforce. So the challenge in front of the banking sector is how do you upskill and change and adapt and get the best value of that workforce, because overnight you will not get technologists doing banking. It's how to hone that talent. And we're seeing that with NatWest RBS, who's looking at changing their, upskilling their existing workforce in that direction. Similarly, in HSBC Citibank, they are using similar approaches to say how best they can use their existing talent to upskill and change and get the best value out of the existing workforce. So that's the summary, and I'm handing back to Tor if you want to just quickly wrap up. I think we've got only
thanks, Srishti, and thanks for sharing your insight and experience within banking and insurance, and getting a little concrete on what could be the next scope to migrate into GBS, and some of the trends around how to set up the operating model. But let's go to slide 15 and say, so when your executives are asking for cost efficiency, scalability and agility, you as a GBS person or part of the business is asking also a lot of questions on how to set this up. I've written down a few of the questions that we get often here. What is our sourcing strategy? So if you go into a hybrid delivery of the services, what could be outsourced, what should we have captive? Really critical questions to get right. How do we deliver more value? How do we become more like a business partner and close to the business in delivering this? I think one of the larger obstacles is basically to say, does a business unit or a region dare to give away some of these critical services for their business? And that is where it gets very vital that its quality is delivered and their ability to impact either via a governance or other means is quite high, because then you get a business that will be pushing on the GBS journey and focusing on what they are good at out in business units and regions. I've chosen to take a little busy slides along here. We will share the material after, but I think it's some really good kind of inspiration on what you need to keep in mind when you build strong operating models around your GBS. This is actually a slide that we use quite a lot when we both optimize and design GBSs, and it is a little bit about some of the strategic options and some of the operating model dimensions. So here in the top, you can of course say, it's very critical to discuss, scope of service, functional reach, location, etc. So you get that fundamental. So what is the responsibility of the GBS? And underneath that, there's actually quite a lot of different layers that needs to come together in order to create a success around the GBS. If you underplay some of these elements, it's not, the weight is not equally, but we also tend to see then there are things and bits and pieces not really working well. In the top line, you see governance, and the whole element around how is it governed, what mandate does it have, how is leadership set up, and what mandate from a process perspective and a GBS perspective does that organization have? I do come out to organizations like your own where GBS has been a little parked in the corner with little mandate for true impact and little mandate really to drive optimization out of their scope. And then there's a lot of demand on them to drive results and impact and cost out, but it's also a very challenging place to be. If you move down into the service delivery model, you see some of the cross-functional disciplines that are vital here. How are you managing your services, continuous improvement? How do you engage with your external or internal customers? And these disciplines, there's a lot of focus on maturing them. And the reason, again, why GBS is a strong concept is that these are truly cross-functional. So if you look for continuous improvement out in 5 different business units, rather than have that as a central strong entity supporting out where necessary, you can really drive service delivery improvements in a different way. Then you have your organizational and people model in the center, which is vital, and the more infrastructure element as well down in operation and technology. And you could say that GBS needs an infrastructure on its own. So how are you driving your ticketing system when there is a request for an internal customer and elements like this? So that is vital to get clear as well. So here a little list for inspiration where you can just question yourself a little in your GBS type structure in your company. Have we actually managed to set us up for success across these different dimensions, or are there elements where we need to improve a little bit? Let me take you on to next slide and deep dive a little on some of the more maybe organizational discussions around GBS. If you go to the left here, you see also a little evolution in this, but starting from siloed functional structures, taking full ownership of whatever structure, shared services, and organizational setup they have. Then we moved into kind of what we call a landlord model, where you actually provide an infrastructure for the different functions to use, but that's all you really engage around. Next step is actually you take ownership of the cross-functional disciplines, service management, continuous improvement, and other capabilities. And then the last 2 options, you basically move into what we call operator or more full GBS type structures, where the head of GBS take full responsibility of the service provided. And the last part is basically to get more and more end-to-end process oriented in that, so you do not have siloed process teams, functional teams, or country teams within your GBS organization, because then you will be a little mirroring the complexity you have when it was decentralized. So this is an evolution. A lot of companies are out in the right side here, trying to manage the right organizational setup and take ownership. A discussion we often have with executives is, of course, how should this be reporting and what should that be? And sometimes we do come into also a hybrid here where some capability areas report directly out to business unit or functional areas, whereas other parts of that reports into a head of GBS and then drives that. So there are different ways here. I wouldn't say there's one best practice here. It needs really to cater a little for the culture and what you want to get out of it. But it's very, very important that you get this right, because this is sometimes a hinder. I also go out to GBS organization that after the initial migration, lift and shift, if I look at the true maturity steps that has been executed, it is limited within the past 3, 4, 5 years. So really important area around getting org structure, mandate, governance correct, process ownership in your GBS. Let me finally just address 3 winning practices, which I think if you have time, do a little detailed look at this and really think about what this actually drives of change in your leadership and the way you operate your GBS. Let me just pull out one element of the 3 levels here. If you look at set the tone from the top, let me just pull out build a peer, not a cost center. And the whole narrative around that statement is not to see the GBS as a secondary, less value-adding entity in your business compared to a customer-centric business unit you have somewhere. You need to move that up and run it like a peer, build talent, give mandate, give responsibility, really, really essential in the way you set the tone from the top on your GBS journey. In the lay the foundation, let me put out a little, again, in the same area here, run it like a business, because when you go in and truly look at the metrics as a business and not just, again, a supporting entity, you also get the right behavior in there. Then unlock value. There's no doubt that measure what matters is highly critical. I walk out to a lot of financial institutions and I look at the KPIs, the metrics in the GBS organization, and I promise you a lot of them are green. And I walk out in the business and ask, what is your perception of customer service? And it's not all green what is going out there. And that is simply because the wrong things are measured. So you need to, in the GBS organization, to measure what matters from the business, because you are a support to the business, and really get in sync with the expectations from the business. I just pulled out 3 elements here, and actually each of these 10 winning practices is a theme on its own. And I want to challenge you on what would the impact be for actually focus more of your work within some of these winning practices. We have around 8 minutes left here, and this was what we wanted to bring to the table. So I just wanted to go a little more into the Q&A and just give some answers to these questions. And there's a few questions coming in. One of them is, of course, on outsourcing, Srishti, and you can also comment a little on that. But there's a lot of discussion on outsourcing in the financial sector of the scope of services within GBS. And I do think, if I should say one thing that is happening, is that sometimes it can be, there's always pros and cons on outsourcing. And there's probably 2 journeys to point out. Some companies choose to actually mature and standardize services in a more captive setup, and then outsourcing once that is under control to third parties, once they take in new, more value-adding capabilities. That actually enables you to keep focusing on where you are on the journey, and you also mature things before you outsource them, and you get more and more value add. So it's the captive setup still brings value. So for me, it's not an either or, it's probably more hybrid and a combination of captive and outsourcing that is the trend at the moment out there. One other question that is coming in that I've worked a lot with is, of course, automation. And automation is, I get the question here, and I also have one in the C25 space that had actually paused their GBS migration to see how far they can get within an 18 months period on automation. So you don't have to go through kind of the sometimes a little painful migration of people to a shared service center. But I must also say that I do see that the speed to benefit and some of the other benefits around getting the organization under control is really lacking a little bit. And there are some out there that does automation at scale, but also a lot of other financial players that do not do it. So there, I think, really think about if you can benefit from simplifying your organization prior driving automation and standardization. So let us just wrap up with these two questions. I think we have spent our time and say thanks a lot for joining. And hopefully you will develop and mature your GBS setups out there. And thanks, Srishti, for your part as well. Have a good day.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.